It's probably a crime of passion. You know, it's probably fueled by alcohol and anger. Once the round leaves the barrel, you can't get it back.
A puzzling case with more questions than answers.
When I talk about this story today, you're going to hear about evil.
A Florida man is charged with murder, but investigators aren't even sure who the victim is.
So right now, you're in the stage where you've got to build your case. Your puzzles are all over the board now. You got to try to pull them together.
But the questions in this case don't stop with the mystery remains found in the suspect's fire pit. There's also the question of where this family of four disappeared to.
When you get a family of four missing, sometimes you think maybe that's not so bad, in that maybe they just decided to go off grid.
Investigators now believe the family's disappearance and those remains could have a connection.
But we were able to find human remains at the crime scene, and we believe it may be this family, but at the same time, as I can't give it definitive until the ME gives us that final confirmation that it is.
To understand where the case is headed, we have to start at the beginning. That takes us back to Wednesday, June 12th in Hudson, Florida, not far from Tampa. It was just after midnight that this family of four was last seen. 26-year-old Rain Mancini, 25-year-old Phillip Zilliot II, 6-year-old Karma Zilliot, and 5-year-old Phillip Zilliot III. William Svilar is a retired commander based out of Cook County, Illinois. I reached out to him for this story for some insight into the investigation. We know that we have a family of four that is missing, 2 parents and 2 young children. So when that comes up, how do investigators even begin to start searching for this family?
Well, it starts with the outcry witness. You speak to the outcry witness. You say, why do you think these people are missing? What makes you suspect that they're not gone of their own volition? And then from that interview, now you start trying to find physical evidence or footprint of where they might be. You're going to use, any areas that they were last in. You're going to start looking for cameras. Cameras are huge nowadays. Cameras in convenience stores, stoplight cameras, license plate readers, video. You're going to canvass for video. You're going to look at any transactions that may have been made on debit cards or credit cards that they have. If they have phones, you're going to try to ping their phones to see what, triangulate a location to see where their phones are. So there's a lot of footwork when it comes to missing persons, especially when you're talking about tender age and a family being missing. So there's a lot of legwork once it starts, when you start talking about a missing person. Now, unless the outcry witness has compelling reasons to think that there's some problems, it's nothing you would immediately jump on. You'd wait a few hours. Like you said, it's a family of four missing. Maybe they just went somewhere and they're off their phones or whatever. Unless there were some compelling statements made by the outcry in the call, then you jump right on it.
In the late evening of July 11th, the family was spending time with Mancini's mom at her house.
Rain Mancini, her friend picked her up at Rain's mother's house, drove her to Rory's house, which is on Nottingham Trail in Hudson. This was the last time that Rain saw her mother and the mother saw her, which was unusual, as we'll find out later on in the investigation.
In the early morning hours of June 12th, the family was last seen at the home of 25-year-old Rory Atwood. They had lived with Atwood in the past and been friends with him since high school.
Rain's friend, Rain, Philip, and Rory were all at the house together with Rain and Philip's 2 children, who I mentioned, and Rory's daughter, who is a juvenile as well, were all at the house while the adults were drinking. Philip and her son, Phillip Zilliot, and this is around midnight on Thursday, and her son, Philip's mother, and her son, Philip, spoke on the phone, and that was the last time they spoke on the phone. Per Rain's friend, Rain, Philip, and Rory were all drinking alcohol, and they started arguing. Before leaving, Rain's friend hears someone say, "This is the last time this happened. You pulled a gun on us," referring to Rory.
But when investigators first speak to this man, who's now eventually our suspect, he denies involvement, says, "I saw them, that was it, don't know where they went."
That's the initial response from anybody who is trying to hide something. Like, I don't know, I never saw them, don't know where they were, have no idea. That's initially the reaction and what you actually probably expect to hear. And then as things start to progress, now comes justification. Like, we always ask a lot of questions we already know the answer to. And once we start catching you up in some of the things you should have said, then you'll find people start backtracking and trying to explain these inconsistencies. Even though as an investigator, you know what's going on, but they try to explain and minimize.
What follows is a series of curious reports that eventually make their way to law enforcement.
A friend of Rory, this is around 2 o'clock in the morning, got a call from Rory, who was really upset and said he shot somebody and was frantic. That friend, then calls another friend who calls another friend, and we think possibly a fourth friend. None of the information came to us for another 12 hours. The sheriff's office didn't get any of that information, and it would have been very helpful for the investigation had we received it. We received third and possibly fourth party information that the suspect may have killed somebody.
We know that they got information from a third party. That third party is going to be pretty important. Because I read a couple of clips in it, and they were talking about a telephone call and a FaceTime telephone call where the person who is probably going to be the outcry says they can see some human bodies in the back of the FaceTime call. And I think so that probably started the whole ball rolling. So that person's huge. Because if I did something and told you, I've made a third party admission to you. If you tell me that I told you, or if you tell somebody else that I told you, it's hearsay. You can't use it. So the person that got that information, that made the outcry, that's going to be a crucial witness for the prosecution.
Why would Ryan Atwood, if he really is the person who committed these murders, why would he call someone right away, maybe two people even, and say, hey, guess what I just did, and completely admit to it?
We don't know what he said. I know, like I said, in what I read, it said that he wanted some help burning some garbage, and this guy sees on the FaceTime bodies there. First of all, it's panic, too. He's got 4 bodies there. But he noticed, and I don't know exactly what was said in the conversation or what this outcry person said to the police, but does he say, I had to kill these people in self-defense? Or does he say, come here and help me burn some garbage? So, his state of mind is not, you're not going to believe what happened. I had to do this in self-defense. It's, I need to cover up what I just did. And I think you might be my friend, so maybe you'll come and give me a hand. Or maybe I can disguise this enough where you won't see what we're doing.
Let's pause the case of Ryan Atwood for a second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be scary and you don't know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim with them in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. So if you've ever been injured in an accident, check out Morgan & Morgan. Start your claim at forthepeople.com/LC News. Now back to our story. Up next, another curious move by Atwood.
The suspect gave us permission to walk around. Unfortunately, we did not find anything that was suspicious at the time.
So right away, Atwood says, hey, you guys can search my property if you want to. So investigators go through and search his property, do a complete sweep of it, and they don't find anything the first time that they search. I'm also wondering why he would be so willing to let investigators onto his property right away.
Again, I don't know. I don't know what the scope of the permission was, or the consent. If it's the home and he knows he didn't do anything in the home, now he's making himself looking better. I don't know anything, and as a matter of fact, you can look through my whole house. You're not going to find anything here. With the knowledge that whatever act happened did not happen inside that house or the area that he gave him permission to search or to look through.
The first time investigators search Atwood's property, they come up empty-handed, but they return for a second search, and this time find something huge.
He gives us permission to go back on their property, which we start doing a more extensive search. We had the human remain dogs, bloodhounds, aviation, deputies. Because of the search, we were able to find human remains.
I don't know the layout of the property. I don't know if it's a sprawling property where the fire pit is not immediately adjacent to the residence. That's the only thing I can think of. It's not immediately adjacent to the residence, or it's not so close where you would include it in just a casual walkthrough. Is there a garage? Is it farther away? But smoldering fire pit might draw your attention. And again, maybe they did see the fire pit. Maybe they said there might be some evidence in here that we can't lose if this person now decides that they never consented. fruits of the poisonous tree. If you're not supposed to be there, you can't discover something. So you back out if you see something like this, and you write a warrant, you go back and you're covered.
And actually, according to the criminal complaint, they did say the first time they went through, they noticed this fire pit was smoldering and still had like embers. And then the second time they went back. So I think your theory might be accurate there, that they didn't want to destroy any of this evidence if they didn't have the warrant yet. And when they did go to that fire pit, they ended up using cadaver dogs and then smelled out the remains. How does all of that work when you're bringing in canines to assist in the investigation?
It works just exactly how you think it would work. You have dogs that are specified. You have drugs dogs, you have bomb dogs, and you have cadaver dogs who are trained to sniff out human remains. And every time we've used them, we had an incident where somebody murdered a family or a couple of people and put them under their poured a pad of cement. Well, in that instance, we drilled into the cement, and the cadaver dogs were able to pick up the scent, which gave us cause to go further, and obviously end up lifting up the concrete and finding what we found. But they're very keen. We sometimes find them, use them in water. They can actually smell human remains in water. But it's just like everything else. You use your tools that you have. You have a cadaver dog. Yes. Well, all right. Well, let's call them out. The handler brings them out. You walk them through the scene.
Investigators say Atwood initially denied any involvement in the family's disappearance, but after human remains were found in the fire pit, he confessed.
This, along with several admissions, is what led to Rory Atwood being charged with first-degree homicide.
But here's where the case gets even more complicated. Atwood is only charged with one count of murder, even though an entire family of 4 is missing. Now, if we're taking a look at the charges, and I guess I should say charge singular, because right now, Rory Atwood only faces one charge of murder, and it's in John Doe's murder. Now, is this because the remains have yet to be identified? We can't definitively say who they belong to?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. To charge 4 counts of murder, you have to establish a few things. You have to establish identity of the victims, obviously. You have to establish a cause and manner of death, which in this case could be difficult. Again, I don't know what part of the remains are left. I don't know if it's bones, but now you start talking about maybe there's a skull with a hole in it, a bullet hole in it. You recover a bullet from inside a bone or a skull. Now you can say that the cause of death is going to be gunshot wound, homicide, especially if it corroborates what he says happened. But as far as the other remains go, you can't really charge a case. You can't provide a prosecutable case unless you can identify who these people are. So you'll see this probably coming up in the weeks to come once the identifications are made, an amended complaint charging with the other murder, I would say.
Pasco County officials say this is technically still a missing persons investigation because they haven't identified the remains yet.
The preliminary investigation has said it's a complex, and this is still a missing persons case. Until the final resolution, until the ME comes back, it's still a missing persons case, but we were able to find human remains at the crime scene, and we believe it may be this family, but at the same time, as I can't give it definitive until everything is, the ME gives us that final confirmation that it is.
Investigators say that they have found these remains and collected them, but they haven't identified them as of yet. They believe they belong to the family, but haven't 100% confirmed. Why may it be that they haven't had this 100% confirmation?
Well, if it's remains in a fire, it's not like looking at a picture of somebody and that's what the person looks like. You have to do further testing. You have to get DNA. You have to identify them through DNA, dental records, any type of medical records that may show a fracture, anything like that. That has to be confirmed before you can say, yep, that's the person. So DNA, medical, dental, any distinguishing characteristics that might still be present after a fire.
It's about this time that Atwood tells investigators his side of the story. So ultimately, Rory Atwood was taken into custody, and whether or not he didn't admit to it the first time, eventually he came forward and said, yes, I did kill the 2 parents in this situation and then burned them in the fire pit. How are investigators feeling when they're getting this? I mean, they're getting the confession straight from the mouth of the killer.
It's an interesting thing when that starts to happen. When somebody starts to tell you they committed a murder, um, we're humans. We're human beings. Policemen and detectives are human beings like everybody else. It affects you when you hear, especially when they start giving you details of how these things happen. But you cannot allow that to interfere with the way you conduct your investigation. If they're telling you a story, you let them tell the story. You don't judge. You don't make judgment comments because if that person's talking to you, you allow them to keep talking. But no, it bothers. I'm sure the detectives were mortified by hearing that type of stuff. I don't think that happens a lot around there. So yeah, we're human. We're humans, but we're also professionals.
According to a criminal complaint, Atwood told investigators he'd been drinking with Rain Mancini and Phillip Zilliot III. Their children, ages 5 and 6, were there at the time, as was Atwood's 4-year-old daughter. Atwood says the fight broke out because of Mancini and Zilliot. But Atwood says that the victims came at him with a knife and threatened his daughter, and that's why he ended up killing them. He ended up shooting them, he says. Is it possible then that he were to claim self-defense as this moves along?
I think that's probably what his story is going to be, self-defense. Um, it's a classic example of somebody trying to minimize their action, and we see this all the time. And as an investigator, you kind of give them that. You give them a little out to tell you what happened. Now, if he's going to admit murder, he wants to mitigate that. He wants to say, "Yep, I did that. However, this is why I did it." He's trying to give himself an out. He's trying to mitigate the horrendous act. Now, I don't know how he's going to do that about the children, where that's going to come in. But that's a classic example of somebody just trying to mitigate what they did. I did it. I'm not a monster. Here's what happened.
About the children, that's the next thing that's almost unbelievable. So Atwood confesses that he killed the parents, but says he didn't kill the children. He actually says that the parents killed their own children. To me, that's a very puzzling statement. What do you make of it?
I think it's a rambling, is what it is. Again, I've seen this on more than one occasion where someone will admit to a certain thing, but the more heinous part of it, they will not admit to it. Yes, I killed them. I didn't dismember them, or vice versa. I just was doing something for somebody. For them to see what they want, what you want them to believe when you're doing an interview, you're trying to get a confession from someone, is that you sympathize with them. You understand what they're talking about. I can understand, and you can understand, a self-defense claim. I cannot understand killing the children. So I can't tell you that and have you believe that I'm still this innocent person that was doing a self-defense thing. Where his story breaks down on many levels is, why didn't you say you were trying to protect the children? Why didn't you say you were trying to act on behalf of the children? If they, in fact, you saw him killing the children, why didn't you say that that's why you acted? Why do you have to put it personally on you? It was self-defense. So he's just trying to cover his tracks. Again, trying to mitigate the heinous act that he did, trying to make himself look like a human.
Detectives say it's still in the early stages of the investigation.
Our search is going to continue of the property. We have a lot more investigative things to do, looking at the property, looking at the home itself, and there's approximately 10 acres there. So a lot of ground to cover. We have a lot of resources that we're going to use, a lot of agencies that are going to assist us as well, including the medical examiner's office. And we have a lot of investigations still due to identify who's there, how many people are there.
A lot of this case focuses on the fire pit because that is where these remains were found. And it gets me thinking about past cases that I've worked on, because this does sometimes happen where people attempt to burn the victims' bodies. But as we know, a fire pit in your backyard isn't the same level as, say, a crematorium that's professionally built to do this. So it wouldn't reach the same amount of heat. There would likely be some charred remains, but some things could be left behind that could provide clues. What do you think all of that would look like for the medical examiner or the investigators that are going in and looking at these actual remains?
You're talking about, I don't know the size of the fire pit, but you were going to do a thorough examination of everything inside that pit. And I'm talking sifting with sifters and things like that to find what you're talking about. The bones are probably going to be there because it wouldn't be hot enough to burn the bones, as you spoke of. But maybe an ember pops and something gets kicked out there. Now you got something maybe that's DNA, where we can establish an identity. Again, without getting too graphic, inside bones, marrow. That's how you're going to try to get DNA to show that that's the victims. It's exhausting. It's going to be an exhaustive search. Dogs will be involved again, I'm sure, and a lot of legwork for both the investigators and the medical examiner, because it's the medical examiner's determination, cause and manner, 100%. They're the ones that decide that. So they got a lot of work ahead of them, and I'm sure they're doing it.
Because the alleged crime is so gruesome, it's possible Atwood could face the most severe penalty. And this happened in Florida, where the death penalty is still on the table. So do you think if and when this does go to a jury trial, that prosecutors would pursue the death penalty?
If you can prove multiple murder, if you could prove the burning of the remains, I would settle for nothing less than a death penalty case on this. I would settle for nothing less than the prosecutor. A lot of times you'll see them charged with capital murder. They'll come in with a plea and plead out to life, take death penalty off the table, and that's up to a prosecutor, whether or not they want to accept that plea, and also surviving family members. But in Florida, you kill 4 people and you desecrate the remains like that, you better believe they're going to be asking for the death penalty if they can prove those cases.
Despite his confession, Atwood has pleaded not guilty to his 1 murder charge. He's being held right now in Pasco County without bond. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.